Come now, you who say, today or tomorrow we will go into such and such a town and spend a year there and trade and make a profit. Yet you do not know what tomorrow will bring. What is your life? For you are a mist that appears for a little time and then vanishes. Instead, you ought to say, if the Lord wills, we will live and do this or that. As it is, you boast in your arrogance. All such boasting is evil. So whoever knows the right thing to do and fails to do it, for him it is sin. So I've been studying this passage for about a month or so, getting ready for this Sunday. And really wasn't until about the last week or so that it dawned on me that this passage is about me. That from beginning to end, this really talked a lot about my history and even where I'm still at today. But to give you a little bit of that history, I brought a photo here. So this is me, and this is my mom and dad. That's John and Debbie. As you can tell, it's my high school graduation, 2001. I don't know if mustaches were cool then. My dad is rarely one to set trends, but that's kind of where we were. This was like 13 or so years ago. It was right kind of on that cusp where I was going to be going off to college in a couple months, and I was going to go out and be independent. I was leaving the nest. And for those first 18 years of my life, my parents had been pouring into me, day after day, year after year, but I was about to go out and be on my own. And if I had to summarize what it was that they were pouring into me, it would be work hard to be happy. Not that they ever said that specific phrase, but everything was kind of centered around that. I'm very fortunate to have the parents that I did. They cared about me a lot. They said that they loved me. They said that they were proud of me a million different times, and I'm really grateful for that. But they really said, hey, if you want to be happy, then you need to work hard. That nothing is going to be given to you in this life, that I should be responsible for my own happiness, and since life isn't easy, go and get it. But there was that happy part, that they didn't want me to be going after some goal that at the end of my life I would end up being unhappy. I think they'd seen that in a lot of their friends' lives or other family members' lives, and so they wanted my life to have some purpose, and that purpose was to be happy. So that's what I did. And through high school, that's what I did. One thing that last picture didn't show, that this next one will, is there's a ribbon that you can almost see against the contrast of the blue, but it's really thick because it's holding up that obnoxiously large gold medal. And it's actually kind of cheap. It's not very heavy, but it is very, very large. And what that represented is I went through this program that my high school had for juniors and seniors, that if you took 24 or so advanced placement classes, you were in a sport, you did 80-ish hours of volunteer activities, you wrote a thesis, then you got this medal. It's for overachievers, people who are a little bit crazy, people like myself. So that's what I pursued, because I thought that if I got that medal, if I got that extra diploma, then I could get in any college that I wanted to, which would lead to get any career that I wanted to, which would of course be high paying. So then I could get a good high paying job and retire early, and I could buy a cabin up north. I decided that when I was like 16. I kind of had it all planned out. And this was kind of the first step, was getting that, so that I could work to be happy. And so for the next 7 years or so, that was the trajectory of my life. I went to MSU. I was in a finance major. I picked my career because it was the highest paying. So I went into investment banking, worked for 7 or so years, and I was on that trajectory. In some areas of my life were pretty good. Others were feeling kind of hollow. And so at that time, through a series of events, a book ended up in front of me. And I started reading it. So it was Rick Warren's The Purpose-Driven Life. And I opened it up, and the very first words in there is, it's not about you. That the purpose of life is not about me. No one had ever told me that. So at this time, I'm 25 years or so. I had never heard that, never contemplated that life wasn't about me. And it utterly changed my life. This was about June 2008. The rest of that page is so good that I'm actually going to read what is in there, because I think it's really applicable to our verses today. Rick says, "The purpose of your life is far greater than your own personal fulfillment, your peace of mind, or even your happiness," which I could identify with. "It's far greater than your family, your career, or even your wildest dreams and ambitions. If you want to know why you are placed on this planet, you must begin with God. You were born by His purpose and for His purpose. The search for the purpose of life has puzzled people for thousands of years, and that's because we typically begin at the wrong starting point. We begin with ourselves. We ask self-centered questions like, what do I want to be? What should I do with my life? What are my goals, my ambitions, my dreams for my future? But focusing on ourselves will never reveal our life's purpose." So can you relate with any of those questions? You had half a dozen or so, over the past year or past month. Maybe even this morning, you've already been wondering about some of those questions, about why we're here and what is going to fulfill me. Because if so, then this passage isn't just about me. It's going to be about you as well. Today, I want to answer basically two questions. I want to answer, who do I center my life around? And how do I make everyday and life-altering decisions? If we can all walk away just deeply thinking about that, I would be thrilled. Because I think it's those two questions and the answers to those questions, I think, is what this passage is about. I don't think this passage is saying, don't plan your life. It's not wake up and do whatever you want every day and everything will take care of itself. I think we are to plan. I think it's pro-planning is good. I also don't think that we're just supposed to say, if the Lord wills, 1,000 times a day. Like, I'm going to go eat a donut if the Lord wills. I'm going to drive home safely if the Lord wills. I think it's much deeper than that. So to shed light on these deeper questions, let's dig into the first verse of today. "Come now, you who say, today or tomorrow, we will go into such and such a town and spend a year there and trade and make a profit." So let's say these are merchants. I think that's a decent assumption. These are people who are looking to go somewhere to trade and make a profit. It is multiple people, but I think it's still faithful to say that this is one person's intentions, that he's saying, today or tomorrow, I will go into such and such a town. I will spend a year there. I will trade. I will make a profit. A lot of I statements, a lot of me statements. These are things that he wants to achieve. And I think this is really natural. Living a me-centered life is very natural. I think we're born this way. I think we're born to think about me. I think we're born to be selfish. This is something that I will likely appreciate much better when I'm a father. But from what I already understand, babies, when they're the smallest, the most infant, they're very selfish. So when they're hungry, they cry. They can't feed themselves. When their body has processed all that food, they want someone else to clean up the mess. They want to be held, so they cry. Some parents have told me that they just cry for no reason, no discernible reason at least. That's how we start life, is very selfish. But I think if we're being honest with ourselves, even as we grow up, still life is a lot about us. That the world is reinforcing my urges and desires to feed into my selfishness. I think that's what the vast majority of advertising and marketing is built off of. That there are things I can go buy or things I can go experience in order to make my own life easier or better or happier. So as we grow up, I think it's really natural to feel that my time is mine, my money is mine, my achievements are mine, my abilities made those happen, that any pleasure I receive should be for me and me only. Those things I think are all natural. Now, but I think it's also possible that after pursuing that type of life, it may not fulfill what we thought. Those promises of satisfaction and happiness don't come true. And so maybe we look to something that's bigger than ourselves. Maybe we just kind of pop across that revelation ourselves when we go seeking for more information. Maybe we grew up in the church and it planted a seed in us that there is a God and that he deserves us being centered around him. Maybe you just came across a book like I did that said something very provocative and you kept reading more. But ultimately, it's that we're discovering that me being at the center of my life ends in a dead end. So then the next natural thing to do is that I'm going to partition my life. I'm going to divide my life into different areas. So some examples with my time. God, I'm going to start learning more about you. So on Sunday mornings, you have an hour worth of my attention, or 2 hours, 3 hours, whatever it is. But the rest of my week, that's all mine. I think that's natural. In terms of money, I think, God, I'll give you $10, $100. I'll give you up to 10% of my income. But the rest of that is mine, however much it is, 90%, $10,000, $100,000, whatever else. That's for me to spend on me. Or finally, I'm going to go serve. I'm going to serve in the children's ministry, or I'm going to help set up and tear down. You have that hour of my life, that 4 hours of my life. But I never really start to think about even my career that I have throughout the week, that all those achievements aren't for my own glory, but they're for his glory as well. So it's very natural for us to partition our life. And what we try to do then is we try to have two centers that are in tension and that keep going back and forth. But one of the things that James says in the passage that Shannon went over just last week is that we can't have two centers. In verse 4, you adulterous people, do you not know that friendship with the world is enmity with God? Therefore, whoever wishes to be a friend of the world makes himself an enemy of God. So similarly, James, I think it can also say that you can't be Jesus-centered and me-centered. We need to choose. And this can be hard for us to process. Today's a family Sunday, so we have some kids in the room. And I'm assuming most kids here have at least two pairs of shoes. Maybe you have a pair of shoes for the summer, and you have winter boots. We're getting into winter, and it's going to snow, and it's going to be slushy. You don't want to wear your tennis shoes; they'll get all wet. So you have your boots to protect your feet. Now, it would be really silly for us to try to put on our boots and then to put on our shoes on top of our boots, right? You can't have both. You got to choose. I'm going to wear shoes today, or I'm going to wear boots. That's similar to how the center of our life is. We can't have two centers. And God wants us to choose him. He's not indifferent. He's jealous for our attention. Jesus said, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind. For us to do that, he needs to be at the center of our life. And I think Jesus meant all that. I think that he wants all my heart, all my soul, all my mind. I don't think he wants me to be holding back any of those three things. I don't think he wants me to be partitioning my life between things that are centered on me and things that are centered on him. And I think that's what the Christian life is, at least in part, is that I'm constantly fighting this natural tendency, both within me and everything that's trying to be fed into me, of being me-centered versus yielding to being Jesus-centered. We see this throughout the book of James. There's been a number of examples where James, I think, is trying to flesh this out of what it looks like to be Jesus-centered. So a couple months ago, we went over a passage about not favoring the rich over the poor, because that's our natural tendency, is I'm likely going to have more to gain by giving favor to the rich than to the poor. We're to fight against that. We talked about where our temptations come, and that I shouldn't just leap to these ideas that it's other people's fault when I'm tempted, or even God's fault when I'm tempted, without looking into our own hearts and finding out that I'm wretched, that I'm a part of this temptation that's going on. Or even working for our own salvation, that for me to try to earn God's love or to earn my own salvation, that is me. That's being me-centered rather than saying, God, no, I have faith that you came and you died for me, and that all I need to do is believe. That's being Jesus-centered. And there's going to be a million different ways that this works out in our daily lives. Going to be major decisions of what it looks like to be Jesus-centered. There's going to be more minor decisions of what it looks like to be Jesus-centered. So a major life decision could be what our career path is, Maybe you're an undergraduate, you're an undergraduate now and you're looking for your first kind of big person job. But you need to choose and narrow down what your career is going to be. Or maybe you already have a job and you're looking to get a different position. How do you decide which one to choose, or even to leave the current position that you're at? One way to do it is just go where the most money is. I can relate with that. I did that. Or, if you're getting a job for the first time, or if the job would have you move, are you considering what city it's going to be? Have you ever been there before? Have you done any research? Specifically as it relates, is there going to be a body of believers there that will help you connect with Jesus and stay connected with him and be passionately pursuing him? Or am I just assuming that, there'll probably be a church there? And unfortunately, I don't think that's true. Otherwise, we don't need to plant churches anymore. And at Mosaic, we are really committed to planting churches everywhere because we don't think there's a gospel-preaching church in every area. Or maybe it's just the physical demands of the job. It could be like real physical, like a blue-collar type thing that you're working so hard that it just exhausts you and you basically just need to sleep all the time that you're home. And you can't commit any time or energy to pursuing Jesus. Or maybe it's not so much physical. Maybe it's just the number of hours that are required. So I was in a career that was 89 hours a week and lots of travel. I mean, that was common. That made it hard to passionately pursue Jesus. I don't think it's impossible, but it was certainly challenging. So that's a major life decision. An example of a minor life decision is just how we use our leisure time. We're very blessed in the United States. Most of us have a lot of leisure time, more than any time in human history. Do we have discretionary time where we're not working, we're not studying, we're not going to school? So how much of that leisure time is God-centered, and how much of that leisure time is me-centered? How much time am I spending binging on Netflix, or shopping online for the next awesome gadget, or playing video games, whatever it is? Not that any one of those things is evil in and of itself, but what we find is every hour of our time, even though it's kind of insignificant when we look at the whole of our life, all those hours start to add up, right? And we can end up in a place where we're someone where we didn't really plan on being, but we kind of just went 1 hour at a time. And we end up being just consumed by everything that is just me-centered. I'm always living in the moment and trying to satisfy something. I'm trying to escape something. I'm trying to have pleasure in something. So how we use all those little decisions add up to actually be really major. Now, I'm not saying there's one way to live life. Okay, there's not one career to go after. I'm not saying that's an obvious decision, that even when you write all these things out on paper that it's going to be clear. Life just isn't like that. But what I do want to say is that I think I should constantly be asking myself if I'm making decisions with me at the center of my life or with God at the center of my life. Am I constantly going back to that question? Why am I doing what I'm doing? So that's a lot of the premise of today's sermon. And maybe you haven't been convinced yet. Maybe you haven't been convinced that, I can be me-centered, or I can partition my life. What James goes on, we're going to cover two areas why he says that's foolish. He says it's foolish because life is uncertain and life is brief. Come now, you who say, today or tomorrow we will go into such and such a town and spend a year there and trade and make a profit. Yet you don't know what tomorrow will bring. So James is pointing out that this is just silly. You guys don't even know what's going to happen tomorrow. I think it's funny that the merchants, they don't even know what day they're leaving. They don't even know, they could be leaving right now, or they could be leaving tomorrow. So to even think about where they're going to be a year from now is a pretty audacious statement. And it's also foolish because there's all types of ways that we're limited. I can only be at one place at a time. I can only, even when I am in my one place, I need to sleep a third of my life away. I need food. I'm not a self-sustaining creature. I need to keep putting energy into my body. I think this is much more subtle, but very profound as well, is that I'm limited to the experiences that I have. So my experience of what I've seen, what I've heard, maybe what I've read in a book, what I've talked about with other people. But at the end of the day, I don't know what it's exactly like to be a young African American growing up in an urban center. I can talk with him, and I think that dialogue is really good. But at the end of the day, I don't know exactly what it's like, or for that matter, what it's like to be an elderly Chinese woman in a Western province of China. I just don't know. I'm limited to my own experiences. But we can still have this illusion that we can be in control, that we're not very limited, or maybe the ways that we're limited doesn't really matter. I think this can be especially strong when things are going well, when life is meeting the arbitrary expectations that I've put out for myself. But when my life hits an iceberg, then I'm reminded how limited I am. As many of you know, Nellie and I had a huge iceberg that we hit in February. We had a miscarriage. It was horrible. Something we had not planned for, obviously. I mean, we had plans to have a baby just a couple weeks ago in the middle of November. But there's nothing that I could do. And we talked with the doctors, and there wasn't anything that we could have done differently. Sometimes these things just happen. And even as it happened, and for the weeks that were following, I had never felt more powerless in my life because Nellie, my wife, who I love and I cherish, is in a tremendous amount of physical pain going through that. Very understandably, she's an emotional wreck, even more than I am because of the hormones and everything that's going on and trying to process what's happening. And all I could do was hold her for hours on end. That was my limitation. I had hit an iceberg and I knew it. And even now, praise God, we are pregnant again, and we're much further along, and everything seems to be going well. But there's going to be that scar that's going to be with me, forever, and it will remind me how uncertain life is, how limited I am. So it's, my life is limited, based on me, and so it's foolish trying to think that I can just make anything happen that I want. I think it's even more foolish when I compare myself to God. So we're all created in the image of God, but yet we're very different, right? We're not all other gods. There's some really significant differences. Like God is eternal. God is actually outside of time. If you want to have like a mind-blowing afternoon, just sit in a chair and think about that God is outside of time. I've done that because I am in time, and it's hard to think of being outside of time. I'm only 31 years old. I don't have that much experience accumulated. God is creator with a capital C. I was created by him. That's a very big difference from us. If I want to create anything, I'm taking something and making it into something else. I'm taking wood, cutting it up, making it into a table. When God created the universe, he created us out of nothing. Very big difference. And God retains power to act or not act according to his will. And he has reasons for all of that, but he can make anything happen, and I cannot. So when I compare myself to God, there's going to be really big differences. And that's what results in that God is worthy of all glory and worship. Because he has all those traits and many, many more, and I don't. And that's why I am not worthy of glory and worship. I'm not worthy of glory and worship from myself, let alone from anyone else. Nor is anything else in the entire universe to be at that center. And so we can kind of get at a point where, well, man, I'm not very powerful. There's not much I can do. There's this, kind of distant God maybe that, I can't really interact with, and kind of be mopey about it. But the beautiful thing is that we have access to this creator with a capital C. And he wants us to reach out to him. That through the cross and through the Holy Spirit, we can still have access to all the power and wisdom that he has. Earlier in James, he says, if any of you lacks wisdom, let him ask God, who gives generously to all without reproach, and it will be given to him. God isn't a deadbeat dad. He didn't create the universe. He didn't create us and then just leave. He's still here. And we'll talk about what it looks like to humbly submit to him so we can have that relationship with him. But once I accept that life should be centered around God, then my life doesn't become less certain. It becomes more certain. There's certainties that emerge when God is at the center of my life. When God is at the center, then I know who my identity is. And that's with a capital I. It's the most important identity it is. I no longer need to live for other people's approval. I no longer need to try to earn my own approval of what my expectations are. Because through the gospel, I have God's approval because of Jesus. That's secured forever. Another thing that emerges is that God is in control. And that when I read his word and I learn more and I dig into a gospel community, I can see that God is loving and that he has a purpose. That even when I hit an iceberg, that even through this miscarriage that we had, that someday I will know what the purpose was. Or why that had to go down in order for him to be glorified. So I think that's ultimately what the purpose is. It's ultimately what my purpose is to glorify God. And so now I can rest in that. I don't need to agonize forever on why did this bad thing happen. And when I'm focused on myself, if that's how I am trying to pursue life, then it's it's logical, it's rational to try to minimize the risk I have in my life because I'm not very powerful. There's not much that I can do. And so I'm going to try to do everything in my life to minimize risk. But when God is at the center of my life, then I can actually maximize my risk, or maybe better said, I can optimize the risk that I take. When God is at the center of life, I can and should take bigger and more frequent risks in my life. John Piper explains taking risks this way. A foolish risk would be to take one for something small, or being unwilling to take no risk for something big. And this principle is proportional. The bigger the hoped-for outcome for the glory of God, the wiser it is to take a great risk. Likewise, the more insignificant and selfish the outcome, the more me-centered it is, the more unwise it would be for you to take such a big risk for such a small payoff. I think this is one of the takeaways from the parable of the talents that Jesus shared. Quick summary, there's a master, he gives money, he gives resources to 3 different servants. 2 of them take a year or so to invest those and are able to give it back to the master. The 3rd servant buries it in the ground. He's very risk averse. And one of the takeaways is that the master wasn't pleased with that. The master wanted the servant to go out and invest and take that risk. That's with us too. God has given us this time, everything and all the resources that he's given us. He wants us to take risks for his glory. We're not to bury our time and our priorities in the ground. So if we're at a point where we can say that it's foolish for me to live a me-centered life, because I have limitations, it's also foolish because my life is so brief. I'm not going to be around long enough to try to have less limitations. I only have so much time on this earth. And that's what James says. What is your life? For you are a mist that appears for a little time and then vanishes. So kids, you guys know this. When you're out on the playground when it's cold outside, or maybe there's been a snow day, we've gotten like 3 feet of snow, you go out, you want to build a snowman, build an igloo, whatever it is. When you breathe, there's this mist. And then just as soon as it's there, then it disappears. James is trying to say that's what our life is. It's going to go by so quickly. And because our life is so brief, that means it's precious. And that's just like anything in economics. The less there is, the more precious that it can be. And life is the most precious that we have. Moses says that the years of our lives are 70, or even by reason of strength 80. Yet their span is but toil and trouble. They are soon gone, and we fly away. So like I said, I'm 31. I'm starting to contemplate my own mortality. It'll be interesting to see when I'm 41, 51, etc. But as preparing for this message, I wanted to try to make it a little bit more real for myself. So I went on a website that will calculate when I'm supposed to die. So you put in a few factors. You put in your birth date, you put in what gender you are, how physically active you are, Try to be honest on that one. A few other factors. And then you hit it, and then it's like, bam! Like it says a date. Mine is April 9th, 2056. And I was a little bit excited about that because my birth date is April 8th. So I'm going to squeak out like one extra birthday. And then the next day it's gone. But that, I'd never thought about 2056 before. That specific time, really that far in the future. It's always been vague, but now it's more real to me. And obviously that's not guaranteed, right? I mean, I could be driving home today and get hit by a semi-truck. A month from now, I could find out that I have an incurable disease. So that's not guaranteed, but it has made it a little bit more real for me. And I don't mean to be morbid. I don't want to linger too long here on death, but that's what James is saying, that death is just a fact of life. And because of that, we should have priorities. That everything I can do in life doesn't have the same equal weight and value. And how we make those priorities should be based off of an anchor in our life. What is that center? And if Jesus is our anchor, then all of our priorities should be tied to that anchor. Because any other anchor that we have, maybe it's the pursuit of the American dream. That's probably really similar to what mine was in my late teens and early 20s, was the American dream. Or maybe politics is at the center of my life. And I think politics is going to have all the answers and make the world perfect, or whatever it is. All those other anchors are going to let loose. And when they do, I'm going to be tossed out to sea. I'm going to be disappointed, and I'm going to be lost. The brevity of life should also translate into being an urgent life. Like I said, James is a very practical letter. He has a lot of directives. And since we start to think about death, and we can either get depressed and mopey about it, or it can actually encourage us to pick the right priorities in our life. And we can, maybe excited is too strong of a word, but it can at least get us in gear. And so there's a number of ways that this can work out in our lives. James used this merchant example as one, but I think he was getting at an idea that's much broader and much deeper. So one example is James is saying, don't wait to do the right thing. Another way to say it is, don't wait to start humbly following Jesus until. Then we could all have different blanks. That blank could be, don't wait to start humbly following Jesus until you graduate college, or I get married, or I have children, or I retire. Another example is, don't wait to give sacrificially until, what is your blank? Maybe I'm waiting to give sacrificially until I have a career job, until I've paid off my student loans, until I've paid off the mortgage on my house. What are we trying to rationalize that's holding us back from living an urgent life? Another example is, don't wait to share the gospel until I have a complete understanding of the gospel. I have a PhD in the gospel. I want to learn just a little bit more. Or maybe it's that I have a full theology as it relates to global warming. Because I'm reaching out to people in Ann Arbor, and they're going to have questions, and I want to be able to answer every question that they could possibly have. So I'm going to wait to bring up this conversation. I think the one that I fall into the most is that I want to wait to have just a little bit better relationship with this person. Because I want to find out more of their story and where they're coming from, so that when I share, it's not just kind of dead on arrival, or it doesn't come across as genuine, but I can really kind of contextualize it, for their life. Oftentimes too, it's just that I get scared, and I want to wait. Oh, next time, next time. So these are all ways that we try to delay having Jesus at the center of our life. So those were a lot of questions. Maybe one, maybe all of them hit you really heavy, and so I kind of want to take a time out where we're at. Especially the next few verses are going to be really heavy as well. What if you have been living a me-centered life all the way up until today? That's how I was, 7 years ago. And you're just starting to process on this. Or maybe you've been delaying on those things that I had just brought up. That can be discouraging. We can feel like we don't want to dig in anymore, and that we're broken. And what I would say is that, well, welcome to Mosaic. We are a bunch of broken people, and we admit it. We don't profess to be perfect. I think one of the common phrases that we say around here is, I don't know what it is. Come in, and you're welcome where you're at, but just don't stay there. That we want people to develop. Because we're not here to beat you up. I don't think James is even writing this letter to beat anyone up, but he is saying that life is short and that we should repent. And that no one is ever too far outside of God's love to come back to him. So I think James has made a case that our lives are frail, that we're limited, that our life is brief, that living a me-centered life is foolish. And so he's going to end with these heavy words, like I said. He says, instead you ought to say, if the Lord wills, we will live and do this or that. As it is, you boast in your own arrogance. All such boasting is evil. So whoever knows the right thing to do and fails to do it, for him it is sin. To the point, ruthless even. But when I insist on living a me-centered life, I am boasting in my arrogance. So when I'm saying that I'm number one in my life, that I'm satisfied with my own achievements, with the possessions I've collected, with my own inherent abilities, that I don't need God, that I know better than God, that I know what my plan should be for my life, and that I have enough power to make that happen. That I'm believing in a self-made man or a self-made woman type of worldview. And James wants to really get the point across that those things are not only just foolish, but they're also sinful. That when we're pitting ourselves against God and saying that we're at his level or above it, we have now crossed the line of sin. So I can point to myself, or I can point to God, and I can boast in his awesomeness. There's some of the characteristics that we talked about before that are awesome, that he is eternal, that he is all-wise, that he is all-powerful. And those are probably reasons enough to boast in him. But even more so is that I can boast in God because of what he's done towards me. That Jesus came and he lived a life that I was called to live, and he died a death that I deserved to die. But now I am sinless and perfect before God's eyes because of the cross. And so now I am no longer my own. In 1 Corinthians it says, or do you not know that your body is a temple of the Holy Spirit within you, whom you have from God? You are not your own, for you were bought with a price, so glorify God in your body. Now, if I humbly submit, then I can be centered on Jesus. And then I have access to the Holy Spirit to help me in that, because I can't be Jesus-centered on my own. If I try to be Jesus-centered on my own, then it's just a different way of being me-centered. And so I need to humbly submit. And Shannon talked a lot about this last week, about humble submission. In verse 7 of chapter 4, it simply says, submit yourselves then to God. And we can define submission as the surrender of my will that results in the obedience to God's will. So the surrender of my will that results in the obedience to God's will. And so that's really important to get that order right, because we don't want to try to, I'm going to be obedient to God's will, and therefore, and that will result in me surrendering my heart. Now that's backwards. First, we need to surrender our heart. We need to humbly submit to Jesus being the center of my life, and that will result in the obedience to God's will. We need to live a life where we stop demanding that I get my own way, that I stop declaring what my priorities are, and instead I yield to being Jesus-centered. I find out what's important to God, and I choose to make it important to me. I'll realign my priorities to God's priorities. So I no longer live to fulfill my personal ambition. Instead, I pour out my life to fulfill God's desires. So this is a really, can be a hard thing to grasp of, constantly making decisions. But I think it's worth asking ourselves constantly, who is at the center of my life? This is a common theme throughout the Bible. Paul talked about it this way that I think sums up our passage today really well. He says, look carefully then how you walk, not as unwise, but as wise, making the best use of the time because the days are evil. Therefore, do not be foolish, but understand what the will of the Lord is. So for the past 6 years or so, that's what I've been trying to figure out. It didn't come to me on day one. It's still in process. In that time, my life has been turned upside down. For this sermon, I went and I tried to find that medal. I thought it would be more impactful if I brought it here today. And I think it is somewhere in my house. It's in a box, but I can't even find it. I don't place much importance in that medal anymore or what it could try to offer me. I'm glad that I pursued all those things, and there was a lot of other good things with it, but that its promises that I would ultimately be happy because of my own work proved to be unfruitful. So there's a few questions that I want to leave us with today. We're going to have communion in a few moments. Maybe that will be a time to kind of reflect on these questions or just throughout your week. Who are you centering your life around? When you look at your past week, your past month, and the activities that you've been doing, if you've been looking at your checkbook, what would that say you're centering your life around? If I were to go and ask your closest friends and family, what would they say you're centering your life around? What priorities in your life do you need to realign so that they're in line with God's priorities? And since life is brief and we should be urgent, what can you do today to start that realignment process?